a little bit of the absolute yoga philosophy, but the philosophy of yoga. And there's a difference because one of the things that I see every day happening is science wanting to justify and figure out what is really going on inside the realm of yoga. And maybe it will be helpful if I give you a little bit of background about me. So my academic background is in physics and mathematics. So up until I really dived into yoga, some of my friends from college, they cannot even fathom that Raj does yoga. It's like, how can you possibly do that? Because throughout my younger life, I was very, very scientifically minded. Very. In fact, my mother, we grew up in India, or I grew up in India. My mother grew up in a small village in India, and she was the first woman from that village of 300,000 people to ever go to college, let alone go to a college, and she did a master's in chemistry. And so when we were growing up, we never called, like even when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, we never called water water. We never called bleaching powder. We called it H2O or NADPH2 or CaCO3. And so it was kind of in our genetic, in our genetic vocabulary makeup. So so that is to say that I'm very curious about science. I'm very curious about experiments, and I'm deeply motivated by statistics and mathematical analysis. So herein lies the dilemma. On one side, I understand deeply the scientific pursuit. On the other hand, I deeply understand the spiritual and the philosophical aspects of things as well. And there's no avoiding it. By growing up in that culture, spirituality is everywhere. So there are a few folks in this room who traveled to India and Nepal a month ago, barely a month ago. And maybe you guys understand what I'm saying, but it's almost like you cannot be alive and not be reliant on oxygen as a human being. So growing up in India is like that. Nobody is doing yoga like you understand yoga, like yoga asanas. But yoga is not about asanas to begin with. And so what do they mean when they say that the country or the space or the people are spiritual? They mean that everything around them is so spiritual that they don't realize, they don't even understand how spiritual they are. It is only when you step away from it and then you step back into it that you realize what it is that they're really talking about. In fact, the funny thing is, one of the 13 or 14 folks who we traveled with was telling me this story that she told some of the folks who she met there, or they were asking her what she does. And so she was very hesitant to tell an Indian or Indian folks that she's a yoga teacher. And so she said she's a yoga teacher. And they were amazed by the fact that she's a yoga teacher, because they said, maybe you can teach us some yoga, because we have never done yoga, we don't know what it is. It is funny, but at the same time it is deeply illustrative of when you are in it, you don't realize. When you're breathing, when you're awake, when you're alive, you don't realize that you are relying on breathing. Yeah? It kind of imbibes in you. So I have these two different sides. And recently one of our students and teacher asked me the question, like, what do you think about scientific pursuit of understanding what yoga can do for the physical body, or for a human being? Which is a very interesting topic, particularly in the West, particularly in this day and age. And so I've been giving it some thought. And so, is this interesting to you guys? Or is this something we can talk about? Okay. So I've been giving it some thought, and here is my position. And I, of course, caveat that with my position because you are welcome as free human beings to think whatever it is that you want, but this is my position. Is that our scientific progress at a given point in time is limited by exactly that, a given point in time. And so, a few hundred years ago, we were just as determined that the earth is flat and it is the center of the universe and everything revolves around it. Just as a few years ago, we thought that poking needles in our body will do absolutely nothing. In fact, it is just hocus pocus. It's just like today, when we try to research into what the impact of yoga is, we come up with certain responses. Whatever the response is, I don't really care about the result of the response. As a scientist, I'm more interested in the process of delving into it. So step number one is that we have to validate that the process that we have, whether it is considering and encompassing all the skills that is needed, all the viewpoints that is needed. Because if you're going into it with certain understanding of physiology, certain limitations in our understanding of physiology or spirituality or what have you, I do not care how good of a scientist you are going to run against those and you're going to challenge and question them. That's point number one. Point number two is, who are you experimenting with? Who are your subjects? Statistics says that you have to have a significant sample size to do anything good. So as a result, I get, particularly in the West, particularly in the United States, I see statistics. We're immersed in statistical studies. And my first question is, how did they know that if my political view is this, I would like to eat more kale? How did they know? Because they didn't come and talk to me. Makes sense. Now you can say that I'm an outlier. Yeah, it is entirely possible. So I'm going to touch on the outlier in a second. So the question is, what is your sample size? That is the quintessential thing that you're going to... If I can give you some words of wisdom, that is this. Walking out of here, anytime, anywhere, about anything, you see a statistical study, the first thing you question is, what is the sample size? What is the demographic on which this study was performed? And there is no such thing as random. The more random you collect, the more directed towards a single answer you will get. It's called the law of average. Do you know what the law of average is? Okay, so if I were to ask this lady here, Carol, what is the height of the statue of Oscar that they hand out when they win the Academy Award? She's going to give me a response. Give me your response.
19 inches.
Okay. So she thinks that it is 19 inches. Okay? I have no idea whether it is 19 inches or not. And I'm assuming that neither do you. Okay. So I go ask that gentleman. He gives a result. I ask this lady. She gives me a result. I go all around the room and I get different results. And I average it out. I can guarantee you that that average is going to be lesser accurate than if I went to 100 people and asked them the same question. Will be lesser accurate than if I went and asked that question to 1,000 people. Even if they have or do not have any idea about the height of the statue. Does that make sense? It's called the law of average. In mathematics, it says that the larger the sample size, the more deterministic your answer is going to be. Okay? How does that relate to the study of yoga? How do you find the sample size of people who are doing yoga? When the fundamental question is 99.9% of the people don't even know what yoga is. So how do you find that significant sample size? The only people who know truly what yoga is are sitting half naked in the mountains in a cave. So unless you study them, there is no way of understanding what the influence of yoga is on a scientific basis. Now a scientist may say, well, those are outliers. They're very few and far and in between who are going to the mountains and studying truly yoga. But I'm here to argue that Einstein was an outlier. Newton was the outlier. Aristotle was the outlier. So if you reduce the outliers, then who are you studying and what are you studying with? So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is, if I'm doing yoga and I really understand the entire length and breadth of yoga. And let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm hoping that in this you will get to, even if you're not interested in the scientific study and yoga, you will learn a little bit more about yoga. Okay? So if you're interested in yoga, you will understand that the asana practice is such a small aspect of things that it's not even worth talking about. Because when we are practicing asana, all we are working on is our hardware. All we are working on is our hardware. We say, breathe this, breathe that, pay attention to this, pay attention. But at the end of the day, everything is geared towards working on your hardware. Okay? So, I do not know about you, but I have very fast hardware laptop, which the moment I plug into the internet, wiredly or wirelessly, starts getting corrupted. This is a state-of-the-art thing. But I'll install one thing, something else will install, then it starts slower, boots slower, it shuts down, it takes 15 minutes to shut down, reload doesn't load, my hard drive is filling up, etc., etc.